afternoon, everyone. I think we're still about a minute early, but if you were here to join us to hear a little bit about Long Lake in Stillwater, about water quality and flooding and things that we've been doing and things that residents can be doing as well, then you are in the right place. So welcome. I see a couple more coming in, and I'll keep a watch on that myself. Well, welcome. I'm Karen Kill. I'm the administrator with Browns Creek Watershed District, and we have a few folks here today that are going to be part of our presentation. We have Ann Wilkinson, who is getting ready to pull up her presentation here in just a moment, from Emmons and Olivier Resources as a PhD limnologist, and tell us a lot about the lakes. And Pat Conrad is also biologist with Emmons and Olivier Resources. We also have Ryan Fleming here with Emmons and Olivier Resources, which is the district engineers. Ryan's going to be talking a bit more about flood risk for Long Lake and what things have been done already and some things that can be done in the future. And then Brett Stolpelstad, can give us a little wave, is here from our partners, the Washington Conservation District, who's going to talk about some of the things that have already been done that you can keep doing more of on this on the lake. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about some of the projects that have been happening in the watershed of Long Lake. So with that, and as you may have noticed, this is being recorded so that you can watch it again, or your neighbors or whomever, but we will be posting this in the next few days onto the Browns Creek Watershed District website. So with that, maybe at the very end, we might have a chance to kind of go around and introduce ourselves, but since we have sort of this main recording piece, we'll keep to the information first and allow some time for some questions and answers at the end. If you wouldn't mind muting yourself until you ask any questions, just to avoid any background feedback on the sound system for the recording as well, that would be greatly appreciated. With that, Ann or Pat, am I turning it over to you?
You can turn it over to me for a second. I will just give a real quick introduction. I will second some of the things that Karen had mentioned and just kind of give you the little background here. And, the district, we have been managing district lakes for 20, 25 years. We've gone through and systematically done lake management plans for many of the lakes. We actually started this process with Long Lake back in 2000-ish, long ways back. But what we're hoping to do today is just kind of give you an update on the status of Long Lake from a water quality standpoint, from an ecological standpoint, and is going to kind of dig in and kind of give you an explanation of how we think of lakes, does it mean to be a healthy lake, how do we evaluate lakes, and then how do we manage lakes. So I think with that, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to Ann, and she's got a really nice presentation that walks through all that stuff. So she'll be followed up by Karen, who will go into more of the details about how what we have done to manage Long Lake and improve Long Lake. So I will turn it over there.
Great. Thanks, Pat and Karen. My name is Ann Wilkinson. I am the limnologist and water quality engineer at EOR. Today, the presentation is going to go over introduction to lake science, and then a water quality update, then a flood risk discussion, and then a discussion about BMPs. So the first thing we wanted to talk about is how the watershed affects lake dynamics. The watershed's natural characteristics are coupled with the land use in the watershed, and it defines the amount or the quantity and quality of the water reaching the downstream resources, and in this case, Long Lake. So that has to do with the size and topography of the watershed, the soils that are within the watershed, the vegetation cover, and then the land use, meaning what type of development or activities are going on in the land on the watershed. And then this all kind of leads to pollutant fate or loading into the lake itself. So there are two types of loading of nutrients that go into the lake. The first is an external load, which is from that watershed runoff. So during storms, water moves over that land surfaces and can ultimately get transported downstream. Within the lake itself, there's also something called internal loading, and that is a release of phosphorus from the sediments themselves into the overlying water. Inside the lake, algae use that nutrients, and plants also use that nutrients to kind of support their life cycles. And there's a process called nitrification that can turn some of those nutrients into gas. And then there's also mineralization, which turns those nutrients into sediments. And so that kind of cycle kind of continually perpetuates in its own little ecosystem. And when there are excess loads or excess algae growth or excess sediment into our systems, that can cause imbalances, which can lead to algal blooms or poor water quality. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about for the rest of the presentation, how these processes of nutrients within the lake kind of affect all different parts of the lake biology and how we think about lake management. So the base of the food chain, or the first thing we're going to talk about, is algae or phytoplankton. Phytoplankton and algae are, as I said, the base of the food chain. And so they are organisms that are eaten by zooplankton, which then are eaten by fish, and kind of promote the health of the entire lake ecosystem. They do need phosphorus and nitrogen to grow. So those are the two macronutrients that we really talk about when we're talking about lake water quality. But phosphorus is typically the limiting nutrient. So that means that in freshwater systems, phosphorus is driving the growth of these phytoplankton or algae, and that's primarily what we're focused on, and that is the nutrient that the state focuses on for their state standards. Like I said, they provide that base of the food chain. However, too much algae or algae blooms can cause water quality impairments, and decaying algae can also consume oxygen, which impact fisheries. And I just want to take a quick sidebar to kind of look at these photos that we have on the right here. This is a picture of an algal bloom, and there are different types of phytoplankton, and these phytoplankton adhere to different niches. So we have some more benign phytoplankton like diatoms and green algae. These are the type that really fuel that food web and contribute to the growth and health of the system. And then there's a type of algae called blue-green algae or cyanobacteria. These are what can cause harmful algal blooms. They are really aggressive and they thrive in nutrient-rich environments, and they can grow to huge accumulations, which can cause this local depletion of dissolved oxygen. They can also produce toxins. And so these kind of come up in the late summer where the water is warmest. And so that's why you might see some algal blooms at the end of the summer there with that green scum on the top of the lake. And so if we can keep the nutrients inputs into the lake in check, this life cycle of different phytoplankton can move in their succession without causing these large accumulations and kind of showing that imbalance in the ecosystem. The next thing I'm going to talk about is macrophytes, or plants, or some people call them weeds, but I really don't like that term. They are really beneficial for the ecosystem of the lake. They are a nursery for fish, a refuge for zooplankton, a wave break to reduce shore erosion. they utilize that phosphorus and act as a sponge to decrease the algal levels. So they're really important to keep around if you have nutrients that need to be absorbed, and an absorption into plants is a much better alternative than to those algae blooms that I talked about. However, they can become a nuisance, especially if they are invasive. Things like Eurasian water milfoil or curly leaf pondweed can bloom to nuisance levels. They could also choke out native plants, and they just don't provide the diversity that a healthy ecosystem needs to support all of its other pillars within the lake itself. So it's important to kind of keep the fact that in mind. So I want to talk to you a little bit about a concept of limnology, which is these two stable lake states. The first is a clear water state. This state is kind of aquatic plant dominated. It's a balanced fish community with abundant aquatic plants that keep the water clear. However, lakes that have excess nutrients can then flip to a turbid algal dominated state, which kind of show a less diversity of that fish community, too many panfish and too few aquatic plants that are not able to absorb that nutrients away from the algae themselves, and then they kind of produce a turbidity or make the water less clear, so you can't see into the water as far because those phytoplankton are just existing in such high concentrations because there are no other constituents in the water column which absorb those nutrients. And that's the state that we want to avoid. Or if the lake were in that state, we're trying to reverse those with water quality improvements like Karen will talk about. Then how do we measure these states? So our clear water state is a measure of fertility, and these trophic states are measure essentially of fertility of the lake and lake productivity meaning the productivity of the life within the water column themselves. So we have a mesotrophic state, which is kind of in the middle of that clear water and turbid. A logotrophic state is a less productive or a less nutrient-rich state, mostly characterized by cooler temperatures, more oxygen, and less algae. And then the turbid state is this eutrophic state, which is much more productive, warmer temperatures, less oxygen, and excessive algal blooms. And the three key parameters that we talk about in these trophic states are phosphorus, as I talked about, as the limiting nutrient in lakes. And then this is kind of the scale that we use to look at the different trophic states that the phosphorus concentration that fits into those eutrophic states. So when we look at the state standard, is about 40 micrograms per liter. And then as we get higher than that, we go into our eutrophic and hypereutrophic states. The second is transparency, which measures light penetration. So the light penetration is based on how many constituents are within the water column themselves. Primarily, we think of transparency as terms of either an algal turbidity or a sediment turbidity. So those two constituents are scattering the light or absorbing the light that is entering the lake so that we cannot see any farther into the water column. So it can either be because of excess phytoplankton or because of a lot of sediment or has been washed into the water column itself. And so again, here's kind of our scale of different trophic states at different transparency depths, with the states here in green 1 meter. And then the last is chlorophyll A, which is a measure of the algae themselves. So chlorophyll A is the photosynthetic pigment that algae use to grow and power their metabolism. They're photosynthetic. So we measure that directly to see how much algae is in the water column itself. And then we could see that trophic state scale as well. And then those are combined to look at a trophic state index. And so here's the scales here again. And then now we're going to talk about Long Lake specifically. So Long Lake, as you all probably know, is 110 acres with a max depth of 21 feet. The ordinary high water level mark is 891.5. I think Ryan will kind of talk about what all of that means in the flood risk area. And then kind of another interesting fact is that it's 95% littoral, which means that the littoral area is the portion of the lake which is less than 15 feet and kind of dominated by aquatic vegetation. So that littoral area being such a large part of the lake kind of shows how productive the system can be, since it has so much of its area available for aquatic vegetation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the watershed itself. It is primarily developed, as you could see by this map here. So each of these pixels represent an area that's attributed to these different types of land uses. The reds are developed land. The blues are water or perennial ice. The greens are forests. The yellows and browns are cultivated crops. And so we could see primarily, especially in the east, is a very developed area, whereas a little bit in the west, we have some pasture land there. But 60% of this watershed is developed land. Next, I'm going to talk about the aquatic plant community in Long Lake. So overall, Long Lake is dominated by water lilies and common waterweed, with some coontail that's been observed. These are all native species. However, there were some. This study was done in 2009. There was a little bit of water milfoil in patches in the shallower waters, as you can kind of see here. This is a picture of that upper lobe of Long Lake. However, these aquatic plants are native. However, that coontail can sometimes dominate and grow to nuisance levels. The fisheries data, which is from 1997, showed that the population was dominated by black bullheads, making up over 90% of the fish population, with some golden shiners, kind of the second most abundant species, with a few sunfish. And at that time, there was a walleye that was sampled there with an unknown origin. I will talk a little bit about black bullheads. They are scavengers along the bottom, so they can cause some water quality impairments as they kind of feed and move through the bottom sediments. They can kind of stir up those sediments and introduce those back into the water column, so they can kind of cause some issues with water quality. Then I'm going to talk about the shoreline. Shoreline is really important to lake health, as it is kind of one of the ways that we can control direct erosion and introduction of that sediment load into the water column. So it's important to kind of have as much of a natural shoreline to protect those sediments, and also kind of that near shore habitat for our different plants and fish. The majority of the shoreline is natural. That is that blue color. Natural shoreline is kind of characterized by low potential for nutrient export, with a high tree canopy, low percentage of manicured lawns, and low percentage of impervious areas, or meaning like hard cover that doesn't allow for any of the water to kind of be infiltrated and not just run off straight into the lake. The yellow is the moderate shoreline, which is kind kind of in between of having some canopy cover, 40 to 80%, some manicured lawn up to 40%, and then some impaired area up to 20%. And then the red is the developed shoreline, which we kind of see near this main circle area that you could see on the southeast here. That would have 0 to 40% tree canopy, 40 to 100% of manicured lawn, and then 20 to 100% impervious area along that shoreline. Another unique issue to Long Lake is the chloride concentrations. Long Lake has been shown to have chloride concentrations that are above that chronic exposure threshold for aquatic life, and it is on the impaired waters list for chloride. The tributary to Long Lake shows that it exceeded that chronic standard, which contributes to the elevated concentrations in Long Lake. Unfortunately, with chloride, it does stay dissolved in water very conservatively, and thus it's very hard to remove. And the EPA and MPCA consider chloride a forever impairment. However, the watershed is working to reduce sources of chloride to Long Lake to not further exacerbate the high concentrations observed there. They're also supporting efforts to support the education of smart salting and encourage limited liability legislation that would help with the salt application on properties that could contribute to Long Lake. And then Karen or Brett is going to talk a little bit about some more salt best management practices that can help reduce those sources as well. But the good news of the story is that Long Lake has been showing a significant improvement in all of those trophic levels that I talked about, phosphorus, chlorophyll, and that transparency are statistically improving, and actually total phosphorus and Secchi depth and that transparency are meeting the state standard. And it's in 2023 it received a B+ lake grade, and it is actually actively on the road from being delisted from the impaired watershed list. And so we want to give a big shout out to the city of Stillwater for all the efforts that they've done in load reductions to Long Lake. And we can kind of see on the spectrum of trophic states that I talked about that we're kind of exiting that eutrophic state and going into this more turquoise color of mesotrophy. And we're very, very close. I know it's a little bit small on here to reaching the expected trophic state indices for lakes in the same area. So that's a really great story. Karen is going to spend the next bit of time talking about how we've got here, and I'm going to hand it over to you, Karen. Thank you.
Are you going to move the slides for me? Thank you very much.
I will.
I'm Karen Kill, and we've been working on a lot of things and collaboratively. A big partner of this is the city of Stillwater, as our other landowners in the watershed district. In 2006, the watershed district put together, with the input of our communities and residents, put together a lake management plan. And that really helped guide a number of activities. And you can move forward. I'm not going to read through those. I'm going to kind of talk about what we've actually done. But if you received an invite, it's because you're a part of this really big watershed that comes to Long Lake. And it is the most developed watershed that we have in Browns Creek Watershed District, and one of the most developed within kind of our area of Stillwater as well. So all of that area of the Kern Center down in the southwest, all of the area around Menards and Coles, kind of to the southeast in Oak Park Heights, that all ultimately ends up in Long Lake before moving on. It is not just the neighborhoods that are in Liberty Legends and Croywood, all the way over to the neighborhoods of sort of the Benson Park neighborhoods to the northeast. And then that whole marketplace area, Cub Foods, Target, and the Curve Crest clinic centers, all that impervious area all ends up making its way through multiple stormwater facilities before then making its way into Long Lake. And with those existing stormwater ponds came a lot of opportunity. So I'm going to have you move on to the next one, Anne. This is just a very quick overview. This is again sort of that same subwatershed with a lot of dots on it. The big picture is since 2007, since that management plan was finished, over 100 projects have been implemented, about 86 of those with private landowners and private businesses. We've worked very closely with the city of Stillwater, the city of Oak Park Heights, Washington County, the Department of Transportation, and then the Watershed District in and of itself, sort of leading some of these projects. But we don't own land in the subwatershed, so it takes the landowner's voluntary assistance. These dots don't even include the elements of permitting, which we also have permitting authority in this area. So there have been incremental improvements with that as well. But of these 100 projects, about half a dozen of these are retrofits to existing stormwater ponds that we were able to make more efficient. We've actually been able to remove about 150 pounds of phosphorus from the drainage area that would go directly into Long Lake. And that is a huge deal because about 1 pound of phosphorus can actually grow about 500 pounds of algae. So we've seen a tremendous difference since these projects have gone in from 2007 through the early 2000s, and really leading to a lot of improvements. Getting to that more clear water state when I started here in early 2000, as probably many of you can remember, if you've seen Long Lake during that time frame, you couldn't see 6 inches below the water. It was sort of pea soup green. There is definitely a lot of vegetation that grows because nutrients grow something. So the overall health, though, of this system has improved greatly, and we hope to keep staying on that trend and then preserve those strides that we've already been making. So Brett's going to talk a bit more about some of the things that individual landowners can do, but we still have some more big projects on the horizon. For instance, that Highway 1536 interchange, you see some large basins there. That water is actually being reused on the Applewood Hills Golf Course instead of making its way into Long Lake, and that's just coming online. So we will start seeing those benefits here very soon. We also have on the horizon the potential Lakeview Hospital site being developed in that same corner of 15 and 36, and some opportunities to work with them not only in water quality improvements from nutrients, but also looking at how that site is likely to add a lot more chloride or has the ability to, and how do we reduce salts coming into the lake with them. So this isn't just a message just for residents. This is a message for all of our community and one we're sharing with others as well. So with that, we'll move it on to Ryan, who's going to pull up a different presentation, I believe, for talking about flood risk, which with all that development that we have on Long Lake, there has been a long history of buildings, and we've had changes to our climate and rain events, and didn't have all the knowledge we have now as far as when some of these structures were built. So how do we manage that risk, and what do we see into the future for that risk as we get larger intensity storms?
Thanks, Karen. I'll just get my slideshow up here. Get everybody I can see. We're out of my slides. Okay, everybody can hear me okay? Great. I'll begin by briefly explaining what we're talking about with the 100-year flood event, or the 100-year storm. A lot of people hear that term and it's a bit misleading in what it really means, but it is statistically a storm depth rainfall depth that, based on the historical record, has a 1% chance of happening in any given year. And that is to say it can happen more frequently than once in 100 years. And in fact, there's a 1 in 4 chance of it happening during a 30-year mortgage. And in our area, that 100-year storm or 100-year rainfall depth is 7.2 inches occurring in 24 hours. As Karen had mentioned, Long Lake is the most developed lake shed in Browns Creek. It's about 3.5 square miles. That spans north and south of Highway 36, east and west of County Road 5, and being the most developed lake shed, it has the most residents and businesses that can impact the water levels on it. This also results in the water level being very susceptible to raising up very quickly from all of the rainfall that hits the pavement and hits people's roofs and flows through those ponds and into Long Lake. So we see the fluctuation on Long Lake pretty rapidly. Long Lake water levels are controlled by an outlet structure that's in the upper left picture that was installed in 2004 to stabilize and control the water levels, looking at a range of different storm events. There's a small, if you've been out there, you've probably noticed a small V notch that lets water through on a regular basis. As water level raises, it comes over the large concrete sill we call a weir. And then downstream of Long Lake, there are a series of wetlands, and those are controlled by the County Road 12 culverts. Those are pictured in the middle. And even further downstream of that, there's a long flat channel that flat channels aren't very hydraulically efficient, so water doesn't move through them very quickly. And what this all results in is Long Lake and the downstream wetlands swelling all at one time when we get large events. And the bounce on that, we call that the amount of water level raised from an event, can be up to 3 feet. In fact, when we look at that 100-year event in our models, we see that it could raise 5 feet on Long Lake from its normal water level. We began looking at this back in 2019, 2020, when we were seeing unprecedented precipitation in those years. We were seeing water levels coming up and reaching record elevations on the various lakes that we monitor throughout Browns Creek. A couple examples here with the blue rectangle show that those water levels peaked in 2019, 2020. Some of them the highest recorded ever. We also saw flooding of County Road 12, Kimbrough Avenue, and Lake Elmo Avenue. And we got reports of people's driveways being flooded, culverts beneath the driveways being blown out, and we also had reported one home being flooded. One other item that brought on this study was that we have a new 100-year rainfall event. That 7.2 inches that I mentioned was part of a study that came out in 2014. Prior to that, we all believed that the 100-year event was 5.9 inches. And if you know how Stillwater is developed around Long Lake, many of those homes were completed, many of those lots were established when we thought that the 100-year event was lower than what we believe it to be now. So what did we do? We identified homes or buildings where we thought there may be a higher flood risk based on what our model was telling us, and we surveyed them. We combined that with other historic surveys to make sure that we had a decent idea of the homes that could be at flood risk. We also have more detailed topographic water, landscape elevation information that we could bring into our models so that we know how much water is getting to the lake. And then we went ahead and we modeled a number of different scenarios. The 2-year event, which is 2.8 inches in 24 hours, all the way up to the 500-year event, which is 10 inches in 24 hours. That allowed us to create some maps to identify the relative flood risk to the various properties and homes around Long Lake. Just recapping our study findings here. The color coding on this map, and we are looking at the Mid Oaks Avenue, which is on the north and east side of the lake. Color coding of those properties means if it is red, the 100-year water level reaching an 895.1 would actually have the potential to enter that building based on elevation of a a windowsill or a door opening. As we graduate up to the green color coding, those properties and the buildings on those properties actually have 2 or more feet between the water level and their lowest opening. So we would consider those to be at a relatively lower relative flood risk in that case. In this area, you can see one home has the potential to be flooded, and then the orange one shows that they actually have less than 1 foot of distance between that water level and their lowest opening. Another area of concern is around Marine Circle and Bay Drive. We've got the same color coding on the properties, with 3 showing that they could be at a high flood risk, the red ones. And then the 2 orange ones may be at a moderate flood risk with less than 1 foot of distance between the water level and their lowest opening. Being that 62nd Street Pond has townhomes very close to it and is directly connected by pipe to Long Lake, we looked at the flood footprint in blue and found that 2 of those townhomes, Long Lake Villas, may be at a high risk of flooding because their lowest opening is at the same elevation as the 100-year event. All of the properties in orange there have less than 1 foot of distance between that high water level from the 100-year event. Another part of the study was that we looked at the roads around Long Lake. Shown here is Mid Oaks Avenue, and you can see that semi-transparent blue extending over the road. We're estimating that there could be up to 2.5 feet of flood water over that road for the peak elevation on Long Lake. And what that could result in is 9 properties not having access into or out of their property while the water's over the road. For reference, a water depth of 6 inches is not recommended to drive through with a common car. And if you get up to 1 foot of water over the road, that can cause flotation of the vehicle, which can be a very dangerous condition. I will note that since this study was in 2021, the city of Stillwater has come through and improved Mid Oaks Avenue, and they raised it. They were able to raise it by 6 inches, so that improved the situation. Moving over to 72nd Street, we do see some flooding over that road. It's of a lesser degree at just under 1 foot. We don't have any access concerns since there is available exits to the east and the west by Rutherford Road and Northland Avenue. On the south end of Long Lake is 62nd Street, and we're estimating about 1.5 feet of flood depth over that road. And the parcel in red here has potential access issues depending on where their driveway is and where the water comes over that road. So in summary, we found that there are 4 homes at risk of flooding on Long Lake for the 100-year event. And there were 2 townhomes next to 62nd Street Pond that could be flooded. The 3 roads around Long Lake are also at risk of flooding to an impassable depth. Now, since the 2021 study, the city has worked to improve the conditions by raising Mid Oaks Avenue, as I mentioned. And then on the 62nd Street Pond, the main overflow is the trail, a walking trail. The city was able to lower that trail so that the water can get out of that pond faster and it doesn't raise as high. We're estimating that those townhomes now have about 2 feet of freeboard, or the distance between the high water level and their lowest floor. There's also been 1 homeowner who made improvements to protect their home from the 100-year flood. And so that's why you see in red, it's gone from 4 homes to 3 homes when they did their homeowner project. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the 0 homes in 2024 due on 62nd Street Pond due to the city trail project, and that the improved road on Mid Oaks, so that it's no longer 32 inches of depth over the road, but it's more like 25 inches or so. We did look at 1 additional potential improvement on Long Lake. We looked at the outlet structure and what removal of that long concrete weir plate would do. And as expected, this would reduce the flood risk from 4 homes actually to just 1 home that would be at risk of flooding for the 100-year. It would also lower the overall average water level on Long Lake. And so more study would be needed to understand the implications of this to kind of project, and reevaluating it would be an opportunity for community input in the future as well. As I mentioned, one homeowner completed a project to protect their home from flooding on Long Lake, and that was on Marine Circle. That involved foundation reinforcement. They also waterproofed their foundation. They installed a sanitary backup backflow preventer. And they also installed a walkout door, masonry flood box. You can see that in the lower picture. And there is a steel door on the front of that that's removable. It's temporary. What these homeowners typically do is when they're gone for a duration, they'll put their wall in to make sure that their walkout is protected from floodwaters if it comes up. Their project also involved digging out a little bit of compensatory storage. Because that flood box takes up some of the floodplain storage, they actually put some depressioned areas in their yard so that the flood, they offset that flood storage that would be taken up by the box. Following these photos, they did do some nice landscaping, and we believe that they have protection on their home up to the 200-year event with these projects. Here's just another example of what homeowners can do to protect their homes if they have a low floor that they believe at risk of flooding. They can do a number of different options for protecting that door. This homeowner installed block wall around their patio. In the event of a coming flood, they could install a temporary barrier through that walkway area. I'll talk a little bit about what Browns Creek is doing and what we can do. We, as Karen mentioned, we do have a permit program where we regulate new and redevelopment to adhere to stormwater runoff standards. That involves runoff, the amount of volume that comes off the landscape, the rate at which it comes off the landscape, and the water quality. We are also actively monitoring all of the water bodies in Browns Creek, all the DNR water bodies, so that we know when water levels are coming up. We're monitoring precipitation so that we know when we can expect water levels to come up. And we're also doing localized groundwater measurements in some cases. Another area where we can help out is that we are sharing the knowledge like we are here today with talking to the community about the current state of the science in flood response planning, and then linking residents with available guidance and information resources. I do have a slide here with a number of those resources. These are active links. So if you go to the Browns Creek Watershed District website and find this presentation when we have it posted up, you should be able to click right on these and get more information about flood risk, flood information protecting your home. And I do like to say that low risk doesn't mean no risk, and everyone is in a floodplain. It's just a matter of for what event. And you can see all of the 24-hour storm depths in Stillwater, ranging from 2.4 inches all the way up to 11.4 inches for that 1,000-year event. And you may know that we have had some of these depths around the state, so it's not unheard of.
Thank you, Ryan. Brett, we're gonna turn it over to you to talk about some of the things that residents can do on their properties.
Yeah, that sounds good. And are you okay? Great. Maybe give Anna a second to, can't remember how much further down there we go. So hi, my name's Brett Stolpelstead. I'm a landscape restoration specialist with the Washington Conservation District. We're the soil and water conservation district for the county, and we offer free on-site consultation for Washington County residents, and we work closely with Browns Creek Watershed District for design and technical assistance to residents, and to help implement their programs, including their stewardship grant program, which I have a link towards the end of these slides to that. You can learn a little bit more, but I'm just going to use the last few minutes of the presentation here to just run through and highlight a few examples of best management practices or BMPs that you can implement on your property to help protect water quality and enhance habitat on your property, starting with shoreline restoration. I think a lot of this is going to be familiar to you given where you live on or around Long Lake. There's a lot of really great natural shoreline on Long Lake, which is important for a variety of reasons. One, natural shorelines can help protect water quality in the lake itself by preventing shoreline erosion. You can see in this picture, I really love this picture here, juxtaposed to the diagram here on the left. With the native species, a lot of our native species have really dense, deep, fibrous root systems that help hold the soil in place and filter pollutants from upland sources. So they're beneficial for protecting water quality in that way, but they're also really great for providing habitat for fish, insects, and wildlife, really preserving that lateral connection from the aquatic habitats to the upland habitats. So the wildlife and the species that rely on that connection to complete their life cycle, it's important to preserve that and manage as a diverse landscape to cater to a variety of organisms. And just aesthetically, they're really beautiful. Another reason why I really love this picture, which isn't it's not a water body in Browns Creek, but there are a lot of really great similar examples that you can find on Long Lake, similar to this photograph, showing that transition from aquatic and littoral zone to upland zone. Next slide. And there's just a blow up of that diagram, which I really love, kind of showing the aquatic emergent and littoral zones on the left, transitioning up to the upland zones and eventually to your turf areas on the right there. And if you have a natural shoreline that you've restored and that you're managing, there's always room for improvement. And so this is something that I like to emphasize and call out, that if you have downed woody debris that's overhanging or dipping into the water, preserve it, emphasize it. Don't feel the need that you have to clean it out. Loafing logs or fist sticks are kind of funny terms for this concept, but coarse woody debris that's down and dead material on your shoreline is also another really important habitat quality that can be beneficial to a wide variety of organisms, fish, turtles, aquatic insects, waterfowl, you name it. So, and you can even go the extra step if you have a downed log on your shoreline and you're worried about it drifting off and becoming a nuisance for your neighbor next door. You can anchor it into the shoreline, and that's something that we can help you with. Develop strategies for, whether it's a duckbill anchor or a tether, if you're interested in incorporating those elements into your shoreline. Next slide. Turf management, another really important way that you can help protect water quality. By promoting a healthy turf, you're making sure that that turf is nice and dense. The root systems are healthy and deep and dense, promoting soil health and the capacity of those root systems in that soil to absorb and retain and infiltrate stormwater, reducing runoff downstream, and just reducing the overall number of inputs that you need to add to your lawn to maintain health. If you do practice things like mowing to a height of 3 inches or a bit higher, mowing consistently so you're not removing more than a third of the leaf blades at one time, making sure your mower blades are sharp and alternating the mowing pattern, leaving your lawn clippings in place. It can be the equivalent of up to 1 fertilizer application per year, helping to retain nutrients and recycling that back into the soil. All really good and important things you can do to promote healthy turf and protect water quality. Next slide. And kind of moving further up slope, looking at some of the areas adjacent to impervious surfaces around your home. Rain gardens, I'm sure you've seen plenty of examples of this in your neighborhood. There are lots of really great examples of curb cut rain gardens in the streets around Long Lake. these are essentially shallow depressions in the landscape adjacent to impervious surfaces that are meant to collect and infiltrate stormwater, reducing the volume that leaves the site and continues downstream and captures and absorbs pollutants. And also another really great opportunity to incorporate and promote wildlife habitat and enhance the aesthetic qualities of your landscaping. And I think this photo does a really good job of that. This is a rain garden that's adjacent to a nice permeable walkway and a driveway. You can kind of see on the bottom left-hand corner of the photo where the driveway drains to an inlet which enters the garden, and it kind of just fits in seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. So yeah, I'd love to geek out with you and come and help you with a design if you're interested in incorporating something like this on your property. Something I really love to work on, and would be happy to meet with you and help you through that design process and connect you to funding sources as well. Next slide. And this more or less goes hand in hand with rain gardens, another infiltration practice, where maybe limited space is a factor. And you're working with smaller impervious surfaces. Like this would be an example of a infiltration trench adjacent to a driveway, essentially a shallow excavated trench lined with a permeable fabric and backfilled with a coarse aggregate to temporarily store and infiltrate stormwater to filter out pollutants and reduce volume downstream. Next slide. And Anne did a great job, talking about the impact of chloride pollution to Long Lake. And there's certainly things you can do as homeowners to reduce salt use, chloride use. It was just starting with smart salting. I guess that's one of the things that comes top of mind, especially this time of year. I think we're expecting some snow today and later in the week. Just really thinking critically about your use of salt, when you're using it, how much you're applying, and what you're doing after you're making those salt applications. So I think this graphic is really nice in kind of simply and concisely explaining some practices that you can follow this winter. You're making sure that before you're applying salt, shovel first, shovel early and often. Making sure that you're not over applying salt, so no more than 12 ounces per 1,000 square feet or so. If temperatures fall below 15 degrees, the salt no longer becomes effective, and you're better off choosing a different product or method to improve traction. So like sand or gravel. And once the snow and the ice is gone, you have excess granules that are still on the pavement, go ahead and sweep up the excess salt and potentially reuse it for another application later on. And another source of chloride pollution that may not come top of mind, your water softeners. It's generally recommended. It may be appropriate to use and install a water softener if hardness is greater than 120 milligrams per liter, 7 grains per gallon. And you can usually find that information online through your city's Public Works Department. This information is available online through City of Stillwater's Public Works webpage. And the City of Stillwater does have hard water. It's many newer homes are installed with water softeners. Some of you may have one already. If you are considering installing a water softener for maintenance reasons, it ultimately may come down to personal preference in terms of maintenance of your appliances and whether that's an issue or becoming an issue. And if you have a water softener, there are things you can do to update your water softener to reduce the use of salt, including switching from a timer-based system to a demand-based system, installing a bypass for your outside spigot so you're not irrigating with softened water, or considering a non-salt based alternative. system, which contacting your public works department, they might be able to help you identify some of those systems that are out there and vendors that they're recommending for our area. And we'd be happy to help answer some of those questions as well, but just wanted to highlight this city resources as well. Next slide. And I did include a few live links on here through the MPCA on smart salting practices, and a few from U of M Extension as well. You can go to the next slide here. So a few links specific to chloride reduction. Another set through U of M Extension, really great and thorough set of links and resources on healthy turf management practices. And I think last slide here, a few links specific to shoreline restoration and management, including some permit information available through the DNR, which again, we can help you interpret and work with if you are interested in doing some work on your shoreline. And I think I did, yes. This slide here, 2 additional live links. One is to our site visit sign-up form. So again, we offer free on-site consultation for Washington County residents. You can sign up for a site visit on our website, which is that top link there. And if you are interested in pursuing a project on your property and would like, it could use some funding to get started. The Browns Creek Watershed District does have a stewardship grant program that's available to you. So we'd be happy to meet with you on site, come up with some design ideas, and then help you through that grant application process to get your project installed. And my contact information below that as well.
Thank you all presenters, and thank you all for being here so far today. I know we're coming close to the end of our time, so I understand if any of you need to leave, but were there any questions or comments from our residents that are or folks that joined us here today? Anything you were hoping to learn about that you didn't hear and would like to find out more about in the future?
Hi there. I would like to make a couple comments and questions, if that's okay.
Wonderful. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name's Paul Huckles. I'm a resident of Legends of Stillwater neighborhood. Yeah, we're not on the lake per se, but like you said, our properties drain, eventually drain into the lake, so
Yeah.
we're affected. So a couple things. It sounds like there's been a lot of work, both on the Browns Creek watershed part and the city's part to improve the quality of Long Lake over the past 2 decades ish. And that's great. And it sounds like, I think you called it the trophic state score grade, I'll call it, is now a B+, which is improving from what it had been in the past. But at the same time, just from a recreational use, I guess you could say, and aesthetic appearance, can you explain why there is still so much vegetation? And for lack of my biological education, primarily lily pads that just absolutely dominate the south half of the lake, where it's shallower, for the majority of the warm weather season. Thank you.
And maybe you can go into a little bit more of the details there, but we do have sort of these 2 states, right, that Anne was talking about. We have a very shallow system. So when we've gone and done bathymetry work, and particularly on that southernmost lobe, it's the shallowest from south as you head to the north is the very deepest portion. So we have light that can penetrate now all the way to the bottom. And so something is going to grow. It's a bit like, having a fertilized yard that you take all the grass off of and then expect, nothing to be there. you have a preference, right, of maybe the specific plants you've chosen to put there versus something else that's coming in. But in the case here, we're trying for more of a rooted system than algal-based system. But there has been such a long history of nutrients coming into Long Lake. There is a lot of very soft organic material that is at the bottom of that lake and just very available. So the more rooted vegetation we have, there's sort of the less mixing that we're having on a regular basis as well. So it's doing a lot of good. It's actually has a lot of value to the overall ecosystem. And in fact, even our state protects those lily pads, and limits the amount that can even be removed. But we are, at a level that I would say is not the ideal level of aquatic vegetation, but we sort of have two states that we get to try to be managing toward, and this clearer state with more plants is definitely the preferred between the two. Anne, is there anything that you might add to say whether or not in the future we might see any less, or is this kind of how Long Lake is going to function?
Thanks, Karen. I think you did a great job explaining kind of the flip between those two states. I did want to just touch on again that Long Lake has such a big littoral zone that we are expecting a lot of plants to grow because it is kind of has that a lot of that shallow depth available for plants to grow. The lake has responded to the reductions in phosphorus loading by having these reduced phosphorus concentrations, but also having reduced turbidity, which has led to the availability of light to penetrate those sediments and grow. And so that's kind of the state that it is in right now, responding to those nutrients. And it is kind of an expected response. It's not out of the ordinary. So I think that's what I'll say. This is a preferred state, maybe not for navigation, but in terms of health of the system, preferred to the state that it was in before those nutrient reductions were implemented.
On average, being less than 3 feet deep down in that lobe. So, I see. It looks like Thomas Laska.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So the question would be is I'm on Nightingale Boulevard. And so I'm on the southeast end of the lake. And my concern is there has to be a balance of some waterway and some meeting area out in the lake. So what is there anything being planned for that in the future? While yes, we may be trying to get the lake back to a healthy state, right? When we think of our kids and our grandkids, to get out on the lake and have a little fun, we can't even leave our dock, and then there's no meeting space in the middle of that area or even to navigate to the north end of the lake. So to me, I feel there has to be a balance. I used to be up on a lake in Wisconsin. I was on the lake committee, and there's a balance. There's a balance for everything. And so I'm wondering where's the balance to get some of that
Being that
navigation
there
better?
is no public boating access onto Long Lake and it is not being managed as a boating lake by the city of Stillwater or the DNR in those regards. At this point, there is no ultimate goal for that, but I'm definitely taking note that you had mentioned that, and we'll add that to the list of input. So thanks for your comment.
I have a follow-up question if no one else does. You mentioned that the average depth of the lake, I think, is 15 feet or less. Over the past 2 decades, has the watershed seen a increase or decrease in water depth? And basically the question was, has there been a increase in sediment over these past 2 decades, since 2000, 2006, when things have been starting to be monitored? And if so, I had heard, might be a rumor or whatever, that there was some talk about dredging the lake at some point to increase the depth, therefore increasing the water quality of it. Thanks.
We did do a study on the lake 15, 20 years ago now about whether or not, that's probably closer to 15 years. I think it was after the lake management plan in 2006, about whether or not there would be potential for, if a drawdown happened, would we consolidate any of those sediments? There really is not adequate locations to dewater sediments for dredging operations access onto the lake. And we actually found that we would be more likely to resuspend nutrients by doing that. And so therefore it was determined not to proceed with that. But there was a study that was done, like I say, in approximately 15 years ago. There was certainly quite a bit of concern about what that would look like. You know, you can't do it unless you know you're going to replace the water's coming back within, I think it's like a 2-year cycle. Certainly concerns by folks, you know, if you're the one having a graduation party or a wedding or a family event, are you in the 2 years where there's no water in your lake? But, you know, we were looking also, listening to some of those concerns, but also just sort of the big picture. Our goals really were, you know, would we have gotten any additional depth in the lake, or would there be a cheaper opportunity for any kind of dredging? Would there have been opportunity to improve water quality? We think what we would have done is actually stimulated a lot of plant growth, which was, you know, a benefit, but the clarity of the water has already done that. And that really wasn't a big goal for the folks that were living around the lake to have more plant growth. So we did not proceed with that project.
And what about the lake depth over the past 10, 15, 20 years? Has that been monitored, and what, if so, what has changed?
We have a 1 point in time depth survey, and we are also monitoring all the inlets for the amount of sediment concentrations that are coming in. We have not repeated that. So the sediment survey, which might be interesting at some interval in the future. So I'll make note of that as well. But we have not seen, you know, huge amounts of sediment. We have a lot of stormwater ponds that are capturing a lot of that sediment and have an opportunity to collect that and clean that out before it gets into the lake. There's been a lot of improvements over the last 20 years with that. So that really isn't something that we're seeing, you know, filling in of this lake over the last 20 years in any sort of significant way.
Yeah, I'll just add that typically when we see lakes that are dredged, when dredging becomes a management alternative, it's typically in lakes that are essentially dammed up rivers. Those systems fill in with sediment quite quickly. This situation, like Karen mentioned, is quite a bit different than that. We've got a lot of sediment basins in the watershed that are capturing those heavy sediments before they get to the lake. If anything, we might be getting some accumulation at some of the larger inlets to the lake, but we're not having that wholesale widespread sedimentation filling of the lake.
I'm sorry, one follow-up question. So actually this Thursday, well, last week and then this Thursday, the Lakeview Hospital has a open house meeting for the neighborhoods around the development that's coming next year, or next couple of years. What has the hospital collaborated with the watershed district so far in the city to, I'll say, minimize, if possible, the impact that all of that concrete and hard surface will have on the lake? Thanks.
That's a great question. Yeah, they have been talking with the watershed district. They have not gotten to the point of, you know, a final plan. They're still, as you mentioned, collecting community feedback as well. But they have met with the watershed district actually as of last Friday. Ryan and I were meeting with them from a permitting perspective of making sure they understand what our rules are and making sure that they're designing in that way. There is a series of stormwater treatment facilities that they are planning for that site, as well as some conversation about some heated sidewalks and other spaces where they can actually eliminate salting on some of those surfaces as well. As far as BMP, I know that I've seen some things in regards to some of the aesthetics of just not being all a mowed turf grass, which has a very shallow root systems. There are some natural wetlands on that site, so they're actually going to be required to have a buffer, and they're utilizing those as sort of some natural walking space areas that will be restored as well. So they are taking this into account, and it will actually be a permitted project by the district needing to match 1.1 inch volume control for the site and then match the rates that are coming off of there. So we're not exacerbating any flood issues, as well as improving the water quality that leaves that site. So as part of our stormwater rules and a few other rules as well. So that is under consideration, and we're going to be hearing a lot more from them in the next few months as they work through their community input process.
Hi, Karen. I don't know if you, apologies if you went through this. I'm just wondering if this recording will be available, and if it is, where we can find that. I think for those of us who have, you know, maybe community or neighborhood Facebook pages, it could be beneficial to share the recording there. So I'd like to do that for the Croywood page.
Yeah.
And I think any
Excellent. Well, Dory, I'm going to introduce Dory, and I saw Young came on here, and I apologize if any others came on. They're a part of our Citizen Advisory Committee. So if you're ever interested in being, want to learn more or see how you can help outreach, contact me, let me know. But Dory, thanks for that question. We are going to have this on the Browns Creek Watershed District webpage probably by next week. And it will be under, we have water resources, and we have a page for lakes, and we have one for Long Lake. So it'll actually get posted there. So
Great, thank you.
yeah, and I'd be happy to reach out to you once that's up, just to let you know, so you can share that. That would be fantastic.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, and if you haven't already, we have a meeting this Thursday night, and if you could maybe put a posting about that, that would be helpful as well.
Yes, we'll be sharing this information as well as a couple other lakes in the district, but it'll be an in-person, a little bit of a presentation and some time just to have some informal questions and comments too. And that will be at the Stillwater Library in the Margaret Rivers meeting space from 5:30 to 7:30. Is that what it is? A 6 to 7:30? That's what it is. It's 6 to 7:30. I'll be there by 5:30, but you might just be a little early. Well, thank you all for sticking around this long. Again, I'm Karen Kill. If you Google Browns Creek Watershed District and you just look under our contact, I'm the one you're going to find. So if you have any other questions, or there's some things you would like to share with me offline about what you're seeing in your lake or in the watershed district, or opportunities for improvement, or if you're ever interested in a project, we can get you hooked up to the right folks. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Al.